Welcome to the Infinite Surface Podcast, Fat Stacks. Today we're going over Drawing the Head and Hands by Andrew Loomis. In another video, we went over Loomis's Figure Drawing for All It's Worth. And I recommend both of these books as kind of companions. One is not really better than the other, but they focus on different things. Figure Drawing for All It's Worth is a lot about figure drawing the entirety of the figure. It does have a section on heads, hands, and feet, as you can see here. And it goes over the famous Loomis method in pretty good detail. Here's an example of how it lays out. Here's an example of how the planes relate to the Loomis method breakdown. And then it gets into specific anatomy. And then it gets into features, shows a little bit of gender distinction. And then after a few more examples of proportion for children, we're on to hands and feet. The reason that we recommend this book is because it goes over the famous Loomis method in great detail. And so if we skip right to that, because that really is the virtue of this book, we have a short chat with the reader, as we always do. Then we have a page like this. This comes a little bit more similar to another of Loomis's books where I believe it's Fun with a Pencil, where he focuses on cartooning a lot more than he does drawing naturalistically. So this is a great way to start because it's about intentionality. It's about expanding the idea. But we see a pretty basic Loomis method breakdown here and here as well. So he's still revolving all of these ideas around that kind of structural concept of the Loomis method. So if we get right to it, we'll start there. And we'll see that Loomis starts to describe in much less abstract terms, how you carve down this clay mass of the skull into a refined head. This is a really, really great breakdown. I think Loomis really nailed this. This is a method that's been used for a long time, this kind of ball and cross and then dropping the faceplate off of it. You can see examples from the Renaissance where artists were doing something like this. However, Loomis really laid it out well. I think that it's one of the reasons that it's such a well-known and well-described process. So here we see him break it down in detail again, really similar to what we saw in Figure Drawing for All It's Worth, but there's a lot more text around it describing it, and there's a lot more breakdown that you can see here, and then there's more angles and more kind of form descriptions that might help you understand all along here. So these are really, really great. They really help kind of just describe the whole process and the reasoning behind it. Then we get into planes, and we get into something that starts to look like the Asaro head or like the rhythm method that Riley uses. All of those things are pretty useful, and it's useful to, as I've always talked about in all of these videos, to synthesize the information across methods, not to just glue yourself to one method or marry one method and then think that you're just finished there and that you'll just use that for everything. All these methods exist for a reason, and rather than say that I prefer one over the other, I just say that, well, I use one over the other in different moments for different reasons. So the Loomis method is a really good one because it's just really comprehensive. And here he starts to talk about rhythms, and in certain places I think he means proportions. He starts to get into the standard head. Here's the proportions of the male head. And then different units, different ways to break it up, and then anatomy, and then more anatomy, why you need to know anatomy to draw heads, and then features, and then eyeballs. And so it just goes on and on. And again, we can think, well, these are pretty good drawings. We did a review of John Vanderpoel's drawing book as well, and we know that we have beautiful examples, and they're really similar. You might just prefer one over the other or get something out of Vanderpoel that you don't get out of Loomis or vice versa. So none of that's really important to align yourself with one over the other, but just to learn as much as you can from any of them. But I love these cartooning examples. I think that's one of the real virtues of this book, is that it gets into these different ways and different reasons for making and makes a link across all this stuff. So just more heads, more heads, more heads, and then we get into women's heads, and we're going to skip through this pretty fast, not because we don't want to look at all these lovely drawings, but because it's more just a repetition of what we've already seen. And so we'll skip ahead a little bit to elderly women, and then we get to babies' heads, and it's really just a proportional distinction. So it's going through the same Loomis method, just a different proportion, and then after we get through the babies' heads, we get into, let's see, school children. Not sure why that's a distinction, but I guess the teenager or the post-pubescent person. And we just get more and more drawings. And then really later in the book, where there's only a little bit of page left, we get into part 5, the hands. And I feel like this part is really not very well worked out. It's not, there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, Loomis always does a good job, and there's some pretty good, decent drawings in here and some decent proportional schemes. But it's clearly not, I mean, the hand is just as complicated as the face, and there's clearly not as much time spent on this as there was developing a system for the head. So I think that, if Loomis were still around today, maybe he might make its own book for the Loomis method for the head and the Loomis method for the hand. We can devise what he would say about that, but I think it leaves a little bit to be desired. So I think if you're really looking for help with a hand, this book, even though it's called Drawing the Heads and Hands, I think it really focuses on the head, and that's the value of it. And the hands, I would look elsewhere. So that is my review of Andrew Loomis's Drawing the Head and Hands.